You said she was just a diplomatic envoy. Lisa's voice cracked, a fragile sound shattering the tense silence of the entry hall. Mose, Alpha King of the Silver Crest, wouldn't look at her. His gaze remained stubbornly fixed on the marble floor, the sharp line of his jaw tight with unspoken words. Beside him stood a woman draped in silks that cost more than Lisa's entire wardrobe, her scent a cloying mix of jasmine and old money. "Things have changed, Lisa," Mose finally rumbled, his voice devoid of the warmth she'd known. "Alara is staying. In the East Wing." The East Wing. The Luna's quarters. The air in Lisa's lungs vanished. The monster they all whispered about hadn't arrived at the borders with fangs and claws. He had walked right through the front door, wearing the face of the man she loved. The heavy oak doors of the grand hall closed with a resounding thud that echoed in the cavernous space. But to Lisa, it felt like a physical blow. She stood rooted to the spot, the chill of the marble seeping through the thin soles of her shoes. Her reflection in the polished surface offered no comfort, just a pale woman with wide, disbelieving eyes, suddenly a stranger in her own home. The pack house, usually thrumming with the low hum of activity, felt eerily silent, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Moses' words replayed in a vicious loop. "Alara is staying. In the East Wing." It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the clinical precision of it. There had been no argument, no tearful confession, just a cold statement of fact delivered upon his return from a 3-week summit in the Northern Territories. A summit he'd said was about trade routes. Lisa forced her legs to move, the mechanical action keeping the rising tide of panic at bay. She didn't head for the stairs leading to his suite. Instead, she turned down the long, shadowed corridor that led to the archives. It was the only place in the sprawling estate where she felt truly safe, surrounded by the dusty smell of old paper and leather bindings. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, the familiar scent a poor substitute for the comfort she craved. Sinking into a worn armchair tucked into a corner, she finally let the first tear fall. It was hot and angry, burning a trail down her cheek. For 2 years, she had been his chosen, not his true mate. The moon goddess hadn't blessed them with that absolute certainty, but chosen nonetheless. He had fought the elders for her, a simple pack member with no lineage to speak of. He had defied tradition, claiming her spirit was stronger than any bloodline. A lie, she thought, the bitterness coating her tongue. All of it. The door clicked open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Lisa scrubbed furiously at her face, refusing to be caught crying. "I thought I might find you here." The voice was low, gravelly, and belonged to the last person she expected to see. Kalen. He stepped into the dim light, his imposing figure dwarfing the narrow aisles between the bookshelves. Kalen was a legend whispered in hushed tones, the monster alpha of the Obsidian Ridge Pack to the west. He was ruthless, solitary, and notoriously volatile. He was also Moses' half-brother, a secret the pack fiercely guarded. "What are you doing here?" Lisa demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Kalen leaned against a bookshelf, his dark eyes studying her with unsettling intensity. He wore simple black clothes that offered no hint of his status, but the sheer force of his presence demanded attention. "I came for the summit fallout," he said, his tone conversational. "Seems I arrived just in time for the main event." "There is no event," Lisa said stiffly, standing up. "If you'll excuse me." She tried to brush past him, but he shifted, blocking her path. Not threateningly, but immovably. "He's a fool, you know," Kalen said quietly. Lisa froze. "Don't." "I warned him," Kalen continued, ignoring her plea. The northern packs don't trade in goods, Lisa. They trade in power. Alara is the Alpha's daughter, a political alliance wrapped in silk. Because, Kalen said, his eyes locking onto hers, dark and fathomless, you deserve the truth, even when it breaks you. He stepped aside then, leaving her a clear path to the door. But as Lisa walked away, the scent of him lingered. Pine needles, ozone, and something raw and untamed. It was a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the pack house, a sudden gust of wild wind in a closed room. She didn't look back, but she could feel his gaze on her until the heavy archive door clicked shut behind her. The tears were gone now, replaced by a cold, hard knot in her chest. The game had changed, and she refused to be a pawn any longer. Dinner that evening was a meticulously orchestrated nightmare. The grand dining hall, usually a place of boisterous laughter and shared stories, was suffocated by a heavy, oppressive silence. Lisa sat at her usual place, 2 seats down from the head of the table. The seat immediately to Moses' right, the Luna's seat, was occupied by Alara. The northern woman looked even more radiant under the chandelier's light, her golden hair perfectly coiffed, a smug smile playing on her lips. Mose was a statue carved from ice. He addressed only the elders, discussing mundane pack business with forced casualness, meticulously avoiding Lisa's gaze. The northern borders have reported increased rogue activity, Elder Thorne grumbled, tearing off a piece of bread. We need to bolster the patrols. I will handle it, Mose replied smoothly. Kalen has offered to assist. A ripple of unease washed over the table. The elders exchanged nervous glances. Kalen's presence was tolerated, never welcomed. Is that wise, Alpha? Elder Thorne pressed. His methods are unorthodox. His methods are effective, Mose countered, his voice brokering no argument. Lisa kept her eyes on her plate, pushing her food around. She could feel Alara's gaze on her, a mixture of pity and triumph. You must tell me, Lisa. Alara's voice suddenly cut through the tension, sweet as poisoned honey. What is your role here now? I understand you were close to the Alpha. The silence in the room became absolute. Every eye turned to Lisa. This was the test. The public humiliation designed to establish the new pecking order. Lisa carefully placed her fork down. She looked up, meeting Alara's mocking gaze with a cool composure she didn't know she possessed. I am a member of the Silver Crest Pack, Alara, Lisa said, her voice steady and clear. My role is whatever the Alpha requires of me. She shifted her gaze to Mose. Isn't that right, Alpha? Mose's jaw tightened. For a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret? Pain? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the stoic mask of the king. Yes, he said curtly. That is correct. Alara's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. How? Loyal. I'm sure we'll find something suitable for you. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of clinking silverware and strained conversation. As soon as propriety allowed, Lisa excused herself. She needed air. She needed out of that room before she suffocated. She wandered out onto the sprawling terraces overlooking the pack lands. The night air was crisp, biting at her cheeks, a welcome relief from the stifling heat of the dining hall. The moon was a slender crescent, casting long, eerie shadows across the manicured lawns. She walked until the sounds of the pack house faded, finding herself near the edge of the dense forest that marked the boundary of the estate. Here, the manicured lawns gave way to untamed wilderness. A twig snapped nearby. Lisa spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who's there?" From the shadows of the tree line, a figure emerged. Kalen. He didn't speak, just stood there, a dark silhouette against the darker woods. The tension rolling off him was palpable, a physical force that seemed to pull at her. "Are you following me?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Just making sure the new, suitable role didn't involve walking into the woods alone at night," he replied, his voice a low rumble. Lisa crossed her arms, shivering slightly as a breeze cut through her thin dress. "I can take care of myself." "I know," Kalen said, stepping closer. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the faint scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "But you shouldn't have to." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Mose had promised to protect her, to cherish her. He had broken that promise without a second thought. And here was the monster, offering a strange kind of solace. "Why do you care?" Lisa asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Kalen stopped a few feet away. He looked at her, really looked at her, his dark eyes stripping away her defenses. "Because," he said slowly, "I know what it's like to be discarded when you're no longer convenient." Before she could process his words, a howl ripped through the night, high, sharp, and frantic. A distress call. Kalen's head snapped towards the sound, his posture instantly shifting from relaxed to lethal. "Rogues," he growled, the word a curse. He didn't look back at her as he blurred into motion, shifting mid-stride. A massive, pitch-black wolf tore into the forest, leaving Lisa alone on the edge of the woods, the echo of the howl ringing in her ears. The king had brought the danger inside, but the monster was running out to face it. And for the first time since Moses' return, Lisa felt a spark of something other than despair. She felt curiosity. The distress call shattered the fragile peace of the night. Within seconds, the pack house erupted into organized chaos. Sirens blared, a harsh, mechanical wail that grated against the heightened senses of the wolves. Searchlights swept across the lawns, slicing through the darkness with blinding efficiency. Lisa didn't retreat to the safety of the house. She stood her ground at the tree line, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wasn't a warrior. She had never trained for combat. But she refused to cower in her room while the pack was under threat. The sounds of a brutal skirmish echoed from the depths of the forest. Snarls, the sickening crunch of bone, the tearing of flesh. The acrid scent of fear and copper-heavy blood drifted on the wind, a grim testament to the violence unfolding just out of sight. 10 minutes later, the first of the patrols returned. 2 warriors emerged from the trees, half carrying a third between them. The injured wolf was a young male, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side, blood seeping through his shredded shirt. Lisa rushed forward, her rudimentary first aid knowledge kicking in. "Bring him here," she commanded, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the frantic shouts of the gathering crowd. She directed them to lay the injured wolf on a nearby stone bench. Tearing a strip from the hem of her dress, she pressed it firmly against the deepest gash on his arm, applying pressure to stem the bleeding. The young wolf whimpered, his eyes wide with shock. "Hold on," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. "The healers are coming." As she worked, the crowd parted, murmuring in hushed, anxious tones. Mose strode through the throng, his expression grim. He had shifted, his powerful frame dominant, but he bore no signs of battle. He hadn't fought. "What happened?" Mose demanded, his voice carrying easily over the commotion. One of the supporting warriors stepped forward, breathing heavily. A coordinated attack, Alpha. Rogues, at least half a dozen. They hit the southern patrol perimeter. Casualties? Just him, sir. They retreated quickly. The warrior hesitated, glancing nervously towards the forest. But Alpha, they weren't typical rogues. They were organized. They moved as a unit. Mose frowned, a deep V appearing between his brows. Rogues don't coordinate. They're scavengers. These ones did. A low voice rumbled from the edge of the light. The crowd instinctively parted again, making way for Kalen. He emerged from the shadows, still in his human form, but looking decidedly worse for wear. His black shirt was torn in several places, and a fresh, jagged scratch ran down his cheek, narrowly missing his eye. His hands were coated in blood, some of it his own, most of it not. He walked past Mose without a second glance, stopping beside the bench where Lisa was still applying pressure to the young wolf's wound. "Let me," Kalen said quietly. Lisa looked up at him, her hands slick with blood. The fierce feral energy rolling off him was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the sterile, calculated demeanor of the king standing mere feet away. She stepped back, allowing Kalen to take over. He knelt beside the injured wolf, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he examined the wound. He muttered something in a low, guttural tongue, an old pack dialect Lisa barely understood, and pressed a hand firmly over the gash. The young wolf gasped, his eyes rolling back in his head for a brief moment before he relaxed, the bleeding slowing significantly. Mose stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You fought them. It wasn't a question." But Kalen answered anyway, his gaze still on the injured wolf. "4 of them. They weren't scavengers, Mose. They were testing the defenses, probing for a weakness." "And did they find one?" Mose challenged, his tone bordering on defensive. Kalen finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting his brother's. "They found a pack too focused on internal politics to notice the wolves at the door." The insult hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. No one spoke to the king like that. No one except the monster Alpha. Mose's eyes flashed with a dangerous amber light, the wolf beneath the skin demanding submission. "Watch your tone, Kalen. You are a guest here." "I am a brother," Kalen retorted, standing up. He wiped his bloody hands on his dark trousers, a gesture of careless dismissal. "And I'm telling you, those weren't rogues. They bore the scent of the northern mountains." Silence descended on the group, absolute and suffocating. The northern mountains, Ilara's territory. "That is impossible," a new voice cut in. Ilara stood on the terrace, flanked by 2 of Mose's personal guards. She looked immaculate, untouched by the chaos unfolding on the lawn. "My father's pack is honorable. We do not employ rogues." Kalen turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I know what I smelled, and I know a distraction when I see one." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows of the forest, leaving behind a profound sense of unease and a trail of bloody footprints on the manicured grass. Lisa watched him go, the image of his fierce, uncompromising strength burning in her mind. He was right. The attack felt staged, a calculated move in a game she was only just beginning to understand. She looked at Mose, expecting him to order a full investigation, to demand answers. Instead, he turned his back on the forest and offered his arm to Ilara. "Return to your quarters," Mose ordered the gathered crowd, his voice tight. "The situation is under control." It wasn't. Lisa knew it. The wounded warrior knew it. And Kaelin knew it. The king was turning a blind eye to a blatant threat, blinded by a political alliance that smelled increasingly like a trap. As Lisa washed the blood from her hands at an outdoor pump, she made a decision. The pack house was no longer safe. The king had compromised their security for a crown of northern ice. If Mose wouldn't protect the pack, someone else had to. And the only one who seemed willing to fight was the monster everyone feared. The following days were a masterclass in suppressed tension. The pack house functioned with forced normalcy. A veneer of calm stretched taut over a powder keg of suspicion. The injured warrior, a boy named Tomas, was recovering in the infirmary. But the whispers surrounding the attack refused to die down. The official story, circulated by the elders, was that a small band of desperate rogues had chanced upon the border. Kaelin's claim regarding the northern scent was dismissed as the paranoid ravings of a volatile outsider. Lisa knew better. She had seen the calculation in the attack, the swift, coordinated retreat. And she had smelled the lingering odor on Kaelin's clothes, sharp, metallic, and undeniably foreign to their southern territory. She spent most of her time in the archives, finding solace in the silent company of history. The dusty tomes offered a retreat from the stifling atmosphere of the pack house and the constant, mocking presence of Alara, who seemed to take perverse pleasure in flaunting her newly minted status as Luna-in-waiting. Mose remained distant, an unapproachable figurehead preoccupied with endless meetings and strategic planning with Alara's envoys. He had discarded Lisa with the ease of shedding a winter coat, a reality that still stung. But the sharp pain was slowly hardening into a cold, pragmatic resolve. On the fourth day after the attack, Lisa was deep in the archives, meticulously cross-referencing ancient pact treaties, searching for a precedent, a loophole. Anything that might explain Mose's sudden, drastic shift in alliance. The heavy wooden door creaked open. Lisa didn't look up, assuming it was the elderly archivist bringing tea. "You're looking in the wrong section," Lisa startled, dropping the heavy leather-bound book onto the table with a loud thud. Kaelin stood in the doorway, casually leaning against the frame, looking entirely out of place amidst the fragile history of the pack. "I didn't hear you come in," she managed, trying to steady her racing heart. "You weren't meant to," he replied, pushing off the doorframe and walking towards her. He moved with a predatory grace, silent and powerful. "What are you looking for, Lisa?" She hesitated. Trusting Kaelin was dangerous. He was a wild card, an unpredictable variable in an already volatile equation. But he was also the only one who hadn't lied to her. "Treaties," she admitted softly, gesturing to the scattered books. "Historical alliances with the northern packs. I want to understand why Mose made this deal." Kaelin stopped at the edge of the table, his gaze dropping to the open text. "You're looking for logic where there is none. Only ambition." "Mose was never ambitious," Lisa argued, a flicker of loyalty flaring up despite the betrayal. "He wanted peace for the Silver Crest." Kaelin let out a short, harsh laugh. "He wanted power. The elders convinced him that peace requires dominance. Alara's father controls the northern trade routes. He offered Mose a monopoly in exchange for a marriage alliance." Lisa absorbed the information, the cold reality settling over her. So, it was just business. A transaction. "Everything is a transaction to the king," Kaelin said softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Except for those he can't control." He reached out and picked up a fragile, crumbling ledger from the stack she had discarded. "You want to understand the North? Don't read their treaties. Read their conquests." He slid the ledger across the table towards her, It was a record of territorial disputes from centuries past, detailing the aggressive expansion tactics of the northern packs. They don't ally, Kalen stated, his voice devoid of emotion. They assimilate. They find a weakness, they exploit it, and they consume. Lisa looked down at the ledger, a cold dread washing over her. You think the attack? You think it was them testing our defenses? I know it was, Kalen said. They're probing, seeing how quickly Mose responds, how unified the pack is. And right now, thanks to this alliance, the pack is divided and distracted. We have to tell the elders, Lisa insisted, urgency edging her voice. We have to warn them. They won't listen, Kalen said, his tone flat. They are too blinded by the promise of northern wealth. They see a golden goose. I see a Trojan horse. Then what do we do? Lisa asked, the we slipping out naturally, surprisingly. Kalen looked at her, really looked at her. He seemed to be weighing her resolve, measuring the strength of the spirit Mose had so casually discarded. We prepare, he said simply. Because war isn't coming to the Silver Crest, Lisa. It's already here. The tension finally snapped during the annual Hunter's Moon Festival. It was traditionally a time of celebration, a night to honor the pack's strength and unity. This year, it felt like a funeral dirge, masquerading as a party. The sprawling grounds were decorated with hundreds of paper lanterns, casting an ethereal, flickering light over the gathered crowd. Music pulsed, a rhythmic beat that usually compelled the wolves to dance. But tonight, the movements were stiff, the laughter forced. Lisa stood near the edge of the festivities, nursing a cup of spiced cider. She wore a simple dark gown, refusing to compete with Alara's ostentatious display of wealth. The northern woman was draped in shimmering silver silk, holding court near the main bonfire. Mose standing rigidly by her side. Lisa watched them, the familiar ache in her chest replaced by a simmering anger. Kalen's words from the archives echoed in her mind. They assimilate. She could see it happening. Alara's guards, imposing figures in dark gray uniforms, had slowly begun taking over the perimeter patrols, ostensibly to assist the Silver Crest warriors. A heavy silence suddenly fell over the crowd near the bonfire. Lisa moved closer, slipping through the throng until she had a clear view. Kalen stood in the center of the clearing, facing Mose. The contrast between the brothers was stark. Mose, the polished king, immaculate in a tailored suit. Kalen, the untamed monster, wearing dark leathers that looked as though they'd seen 100 battles. You are overstepping, Kalen. Mose's voice rang out, cold and authoritative. And you are blind. Kalen countered, his voice a low rumble that carried easily over the crackling fire. Your guests are mapping our patrol routes. They are noting response times. Alara stepped forward, her smile brittle. My guards are merely trying to integrate, Alpha Kalen, to learn your ways. Kalen didn't even look at her. His focus remained entirely on Mose. They are preparing a siege, and you are holding the door open for them. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a wave of nervous energy rippling outward. To openly challenge the king's judgment in front of the pack, in front of foreign dignitaries, was unthinkable. Enough, Mose commanded, the wolf in his voice demanding submission. Several pack members instinctively lowered their heads, baring their necks. Kalen didn't flinch. He stood tall, an immovable object, against an unstoppable force. You are meant to protect this pack, Mose, not sell it to the highest bidder. Mose's face contorted in rage. The diplomatic facade crumbled, revealing the raw, violent nature of the Alpha beneath. He moved with blinding speed, crossing the distance between them and grabbing Kaelin by the throat. The crowd gasped, stumbling backward. Alara let out a small dramatic cry, though her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Lisa's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to scream, to intervene, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Mose lifted Kaelin an inch off the ground, his claws extending, digging into his brother's flesh. "You will not disrespect me in my own territory." Mose snarled, spit flying from his lips. "You are an outcast, a monster. You know nothing of leadership." Kaelin didn't struggle. He simply looked down at Mose, his expression impassive. The only sign of strain, a slight tightening around his eyes. "I know a trap when I see one," he choked out, his voice a gravelly rasp. "And I know a coward when I look him in the eye." The insult hung in the air, a final, unforgivable transgression. Mose roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. He threw Kaelin backward. The larger wolf crashed into the heavy wooden tables laden with food, splintering them into a shower of wood and ruined dishes. The music stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the bonfire and the sound of Kaelin slowly pushing himself up from the wreckage. He wiped a smear of blood from his mouth, his dark eyes burning with a dangerous, untamed light. He didn't shift, but the beast within him was visible. A terrifying presence radiating outward, pushing against the edges of his humanity. He looked at Mose, then his gaze swept over the silent, terrified crowd, finally landing on Lisa. He held her eyes for a long moment, a silent message passing between them. "I told you." He turned his back on the king and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the lantern light. Lisa watched him go, a profound realization settling over her. Mose might wear the crown, but Kaelin was the only one fighting for the pack. And as the king turned back to his northern bride, leaving his brother bleeding in the dirt, Lisa knew unequivocally where her loyalty now lay. She wasn't fighting for a king anymore. She was fighting for survival. The morning after the festival broke with a heavy, oppressive silence that smothered the pack house like a woolen blanket. The wreckage from the bonfire had been cleared away before dawn, leaving no physical trace of the violence that had erupted. But the psychic scars remained, raw and pulsing beneath the forced normalcy. Lisa moved through the morning routine with mechanical precision. She avoided the main dining hall, opting for a quiet breakfast in the small sunroom off the kitchens. She wasn't hiding precisely, but she had no desire to face the inevitable whispers and sidelong glances. The pack was fractured. She could feel it in the way the Omegas scurried past her, eyes averted, and in the tense, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever a northern guard approached. Kaelin's public defiance had cracked the foundation of Mose's authority, exposing the rot beneath the gilded surface of the new alliance. As she sipped her lukewarm tea, the door to the sunroom opened, and Elder Thorne stepped in. He looked older than he had just a few days ago, the lines around his mouth deeply etched, his shoulders slightly stooped. "Lisa," he greeted her, his voice a low rumble. "May I sit?" "Of course, Elder," she replied, gesturing to the chair opposite her. He lowered himself into the seat with a quiet sigh, staring at his gnarled hands for a long moment before speaking. "The Alpha has ordered Kaelin confined to the dungeons." Lisa's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her mug. The dungeons were cold, damp, and reserved for only the most dangerous rogues or traitors. To put his own brother there? On what grounds? She managed to ask, her voice tight. "Treason," Thorne replied, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were filled with a profound sorrow. "For challenging the Alpha and threatening our guests." "He didn't threaten them. He exposed them," Lisa countered. the anger she'd been holding back since last night finally bubbling to the surface. "They're mapping our defenses, Elder Thorn. You saw them. I saw an unfortunate misunderstanding exacerbated by Kalen's volatile nature," Thorn said carefully, echoing Moses' likely defense. But his tone lacked conviction. "You don't believe that?" Lisa pressed, leaning forward. "I know you don't." Thorn closed his eyes, a weary sigh escaping his lips. "It doesn't matter what I believe, Lisa. It matters what the king has decreed. The treaty with the North is signed. The trade routes are opening. We cannot afford a war, especially not an internal one." "And if the war is already here?" she asked softly, echoing Kalen's words. Thorn didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window at the manicured gardens, now heavily patrolled by Alara's guards. "Mose is changed," he admitted quietly. "The North has hardened him. He sees only strategy now, not the people he leads." "Then we have to make him see," Lisa insisted. "How?" Thorn asked, a bitter edge to his voice. "He listens only to Alara, and Kalen is locked away." "Then let him out." The words hung in the air, audacious and dangerous. Thorn stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. "That is madness. It would be open rebellion. If we do nothing, we lose the pack anyway," Lisa argued, her resolve solidifying with every word. "You know the history, Elder. The North doesn't ally. They assimilate. We are being swallowed whole, and Mose is handing them the knife." Thorn was silent for a long time. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, marking the tense seconds. Finally, he stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. "The dungeons are heavily guarded," he said, not looking at her. "By Alara's men. The shift change is at midnight. There is a 5-minute window where the outer corridor is unwatched." He didn't wait for her response, simply turned and walked out of the sunroom. Lisa sat in the silence, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. It wasn't permission, but it was a path. And it was terrifying. The pack house at midnight was a labyrinth of shadows. Lisa moved with a silence born of necessity, sticking to the servant corridors and hidden stairwells she had learned during her 2 years as Moses' chosen. She wore dark clothing, her hair pulled back tightly, every sense on high alert. The descent to the dungeons was a physical manifestation of the pack's hidden darkness. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying the scent of damp earth and old fear. The polished marble gave way to rough-hewn stone, the bright chandeliers replaced by flickering torches that cast monstrous shadows on the walls. She reached the iron-reinforced door that led to the outer corridor. True to Thorn's word, it was unguarded. She slipped through, the heavy hinges groaning softly in protest. The corridor was lined with heavy wooden doors, most of them mercifully empty. At the far end, a single torch illuminated a cell secured by solid iron bars. Lisa crept closer, her footsteps echoing slightly on the stone floor. As she approached, she saw him. Kalen was sitting on the narrow stone bench, his back against the wall, one knee drawn up. He was chained, heavy iron shackles binding his wrists to the wall. He looked battered. Fresh bruises mottled his jaw, and a cut above his eye had dried to a dark crust. Yet, even in chains, he radiated a dangerous, coiled energy. He didn't look up as she approached, his head bowed, seemingly lost in thought. Or perhaps simply conserving strength. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sound of dripping water. His head snapped up, his dark eyes locking onto hers instantly. The predatory intensity in his gaze made her breath catch, but it quickly softened into something resembling surprise, and then a weary respect. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse and likely shouting. "I know," Lisa said, stepping closer to the bars. "Thorn told me about the shift change." Kaelin's eyebrows rose slightly. The old man has some fight left in him after all. "Good." He shifted, the chains rattling loudly in the quiet space. "But it doesn't matter. You can't break these." Lisa reached into her pocket and pulled out a heavy iron key ring. Thorn is the keeper of the archives, and the archives hold more than just books. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking slightly. Finding the right one took agonizing seconds. The heavy lock clicked, and the iron door swung open with a screech that set her teeth on edge. She hurried inside, moving to unlock the shackles on his wrists. He watched her, his expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" he asked as she struggled with the heavy mechanism. "Mose will have you exiled. Or worse." "He's already exiled me," Lisa replied, her voice steadying. The lock clicked, and the first shackle fell away. She moved to the second. "He chose Ilara. He chose the north, and I am choosing the Silver Crest." The second shackle hit the floor with a loud clang. Kaelin rubbed his raw wrists, his gaze fixed on her. The silence between them was profound, heavier than the damp air of the dungeon. "They're planning an attack," Kaelin said suddenly, his voice low and urgent. "Tonight. I heard the guards talking." Lisa froze. "Tonight? But why?" "Because the pack is demoralized after the festival," Kaelin explained, pushing himself up from the bench. He towered over her in the small cell, his presence overwhelming. "Mose looks weak, I'm locked up, and the elders are divided. It's the perfect time to strike." "An attack from the outside?" "No," Kaelin said grimly. "From the inside. Ilara's guards aren't here to protect, they're an occupying force. They're going to seize control of the armory and the communication towers." Panic flared in Lisa's chest, cold and sharp. "We have to warn Mose." Kaelin grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "Mose won't listen. He's blind to it. And by the time he realizes he's been betrayed, it will be too late." "Then what do we do?" "We fight," Kaelin said, his eyes burning with a fierce, untamed light. "But first, we need to get out of here." They emerged from the dungeons, just as the first shouts rang out from the floors above. It wasn't the chaotic roar of an external attack. It was the sharp, disciplined bark of orders and the clash of steel on steel. The siege had begun. The pack house was unrecognizable. The elegant corridors were now a battlefield. Silver Crest warriors, caught off guard and confused, were fighting desperately against the heavily armed and coordinated northern guards. The air was thick with the scent of blood, fear, and ozone as wolves shifted, their roars shaking the very foundations of the house. Lisa stayed close to Kaelin, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He moved with a terrifying, brutal efficiency. He didn't bother shifting. His human strength, fueled by the alpha blood running through his veins, was more than enough. He dispatched 2 northern guards with swift, bone-crushing blows, clearing a path toward the grand hall. "We need to get to the armory," Kaelin shouted over the din, tossing a discarded sword to a disarmed Silver Crest warrior. "If they secure the weapons, it's over." They fought their way through the chaotic melee, the once familiar rooms now dangerous terrain. Lisa found herself pressed against a wall. clutching a heavy silver candlestick she'd grabbed from a side table, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She watched Kaelin tear through the opposition, a force of nature unleashed. And for the first time, she truly understood why they called him a monster. And why, right now, they needed him. They reached the heavy oak doors of the grand hall just as they were thrown open. Alara stood there, flanked by her personal guard. She wore a dark, practical riding habit, her golden hair pulled back tightly. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating mask of command. "Secure the perimeter," she barked at her men. "No one leaves." Her gaze landed on Kaelin, then flicked to Lisa, her eyes narrowing. The invasion is over, Alara," Kaelin growled, stepping in front of Lisa, shielding her from the northern guards. Alara let out a short, harsh laugh. "It hasn't even begun. My father's army is waiting at the border. By dawn, this pack will belong to the north." "Where is Mose?" Lisa demanded, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the tense standoff. "The king is indisposed," Alara sneered. "He is currently confined to his quarters, realizing the grave error he made in trusting his heart over his head." The betrayal was complete. Mose hadn't just been foolish, he had been neutralized. "You won't take this pack," Kaelin said, his voice dropping an octave, a low, menacing rumble that vibrated in the air. The beast beneath his skin was pushing hard against the surface, his eyes flashing a brilliant, dangerous amber. "I already have," Alara countered, raising her hand. Her guards raised their weapons, a line of deadly steel pointed directly at Kaelin and Lisa. Before Alara could give the order, a thunderous roar shattered the tension. It didn't come from Kaelin, but from the grand staircase behind Alara. Mose stood at the top of the stairs, leaning heavily against the banister. He was bleeding from a deep gash on his shoulder, his clothes torn, his face pale and drawn. But his eyes blazed with a fury that rivaled Kaelin's. He hadn't been confined. He had fought his way out. "You are mistaken, Alara," Mose gasped, his voice tight with pain but ringing with authority. "The silver crest belongs to no one but its alpha." Alara spun around, shock registering on her face for the first time. "Kill him!" she screamed at her guards. The guards hesitated, torn between their orders and the sheer, overwhelming presence of a furious Alpha King. That hesitation was all Kaelin needed. He lunged, a blur of motion, crashing into the line of guards before they could react. The grand hall erupted into chaos once again, a brutal, desperate clash for the soul of the pack. Lisa didn't hide this time. She ran toward the stairs, toward Mose, dodging the fighting. The king who had discarded her was now fighting for his life, and for the pack she had sworn to protect. The battle lines were drawn, and the night was far from over. The battle in the grand hall was a blur of violence and deafening noise. Mose, despite his injuries, descended the stairs like a vengeful god, shifting halfway down. His massive, silver-furred wolf form crashed into Alara's guards, a brutal display of the power he had kept leashed for too long. Kaelin fought beside him, their ancient rivalry momentarily suspended in the face of a common enemy. The two alphas, brothers bound by blood and separated by ideology, fought with a terrifying synergy. They tore through the northern ranks, a whirlwind of claws and fangs, driving the invaders back toward the main doors. Lisa stayed out of the direct line of fire, moving quickly to pull injured Silver Crest warriors out of the fray, applying pressure to wounds and shouting encouragement. She was no longer the quiet, discarded chosen. She was a vital part of the defense, her voice ringing clear over the din of battle. Alara, realizing the tide was turning, tried to retreat, slipping toward the side exit that led to the gardens. "Stop her!" Mose roared, his voice rough in his wolf form. Kalen didn't hesitate. He launched himself across the hall, intercepting Alara just as she reached the door. He didn't strike her. He simply grabbed her arm, his grip an iron vise, pinning her against the heavy oak frame. "It's over," Kalen growled, his face inches from hers. Alara glared at him, her mask of composure finally shattering, revealing the desperate, ambitious woman beneath. "My father will burn this pack to the ground," she hissed. "Let him try," Mose snarled, shifting back to his human form. He stood amidst the carnage of his own home, bruised, bleeding, and breathing heavily. He looked around at the defeated northern guards, then at his own warriors, battered but victorious. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the groans of the injured and the crackle of the damaged chandeliers. Mose walked slowly toward Alara, his eyes devoid of the warmth he had once shown her. "Take your guards," he said, his voice cold and hard. "Take your treaty, and tell your father that the Silver Crest is closed to the north." Alara wrenched her arm from Kalen's grasp, her chin held high despite the defeat. She didn't say another word, simply turned and walked out the door, her surviving guards scrambling to follow her. The threat was gone, but the damage was done. The pack house was in ruins, the trust of the elders was shattered, and the king was broken. Mose turned to look at Kalen, then at Lisa, who was kneeling beside a wounded warrior. He looked exhausted, the weight of his crown suddenly too heavy to bear. "I was a fool," Mose said softly, the words carrying in the quiet hall. It was an admission of defeat, a surrender of his pride. "You were blinded by ambition." Kalen corrected him, his tone flat. He didn't gloat, he just stated the facts. "You forgot what it means to protect the pack." Mose didn't argue. He looked at Lisa, his expression filled with profound regret. "I am sorry, Lisa. For everything." Lisa stood up, wiping the blood from her hands on her ruined dress. She looked at the man she had loved, the man who had betrayed her, and felt a surprising sense of detachment. "I accept your apology, Alpha," she said quietly. "But an apology doesn't fix this." She gestured to the ruined hall. "It doesn't fix what you broke." Mose nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words. He turned back to Kalen. "The pack needs strength right now. They need an alpha who isn't compromised." Kalen stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "What are you saying?" "I am stepping down," Mose declared, his voice echoing in the hall. A gasp rippled through those gathered warriors, but no one argued. "I yield the Silver Crest to you, Kalen." The silence returned, thicker and heavier than before. Kalen stared at his brother, processing the magnitude of the offer. He had always been the outcast, the monster. Now he was being handed the crown. He looked at Lisa, his dark eyes searching hers for a long moment. She didn't look away, holding his gaze with a steady, unflinching resolve. Kalen turned back to Mose. "I accept." The transition of power was swift and unceremonious. There was no grand ceremony, no celebration, just a broken king handing over his burden to a reluctant savior. As dawn broke, casting long, pale shadows over the ruined pack house, Lisa stood on the terrace, breathing in the cool morning air. The danger had passed, but a new era had begun. She felt a presence behind her, the familiar scent of pine needles and ozone. Kalen stepped up beside her, his powerful frame imposing even in repose. He was the Alpha now, the leader of the Silver Crest. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, watching the sun rise over the forest. "So," Lisa said finally, breaking the comfortable silence, "what happens now?" Kalen looked down at her, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Now, we rebuild, and we prepare. The North won't forget this insult." "We will be ready," Lisa said, surprised by the fierce conviction in her own voice. Kalen reached out, his hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. It was a tender gesture from a man known only for his brutality. "I know we will," he said softly. "Because I chose you, Lisa. And I don't make mistakes." The Monster Alpha had chosen her, not out of political necessity, but out of genuine respect and a shared resilience. And as Lisa looked into his dark, fathomless eyes, she knew she had finally found her true place, not as a discarded pawn, but as an equal in a pack that had finally found its true strength. The embers of betrayal burned down, leaving a forged steel resolve in their wake. Lisa went from a discarded chosen to the fiery heart of a reborn pack, standing beside a monster who turned out to be the true king. If you found yourself holding your breath during the siege of the Silver Crest, give this story a like. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did Mose get what he deserved, or was his downfall too swift? Subscribe for more thrilling alpha romances and intense drama. And don't miss our next story where the shadows hold even deeper secrets.